Now, we know in sales nowadays, we don't have to go out, because in the modern way, we don't go out to a client and barf all over them with our speeds and feeds and features and benefits, right? But that's not to say that our potential clients don't need that information for speeds and feeds and benefits. And this is when you tie in inbound marketing. Well, one of the things I say to modern salespeople, enterprise salespeople, business to business salespeople, is you've got to do two things. You've got to post something, blog or post or LinkedIn, and you have to comment in conversation that has to do with your industry. That's it. Those two things consistently, right?
Well, what do you think is the proper balance then of created content versus curated content?
You know, it all comes down to what you're doing and what your position is. So it's like, it's basically, if you were an inside salesperson where they call you, that's different, right? Whereas if you're an outbound salesperson selling a very niche product, a very specific product, or a new market, you know, then it's a lot different, right? So what happens is that when you're talking, remember I sort of said again, if you talk about the tree and you go information technology, drilling down, getting more and more specific. Well, as you get more and more specific, the questions are going to be there. That's curate. You're answering questions specifically. But the thing is, when we talked about, let's say, blog posts, for instance, I'm going to go back to answer your question, but when we talk about blog posts, it used to be that we would have a form letter that we'd email our customers that were interested or called us.
Right.
Well, what a great blog post that would make, right? Edit a couple of that, bam, there you go. Grab a whole bunch out of your library at work, change a couple things, and post it, because your customers, that was the information you thought your customers wanted, and in some cases, that was the information the customers did want. So if they're looking for that information online nowadays, why not give it to them in advance and then have your name attached to it, either through a blog or through your comments, especially if you're the first person to comment. I don't know, have you heard of that as well?
I haven't.
You know, okay, this is a great sort of deal. What happens is, if somebody puts up they put up a blog post, it goes to a LinkedIn Pulse, post goes up, and what do you call it? You're the first person to comment. Your comment stays there forever, right? So in other words, if you comment, and you put your hashtag in, right, and that thing goes viral, you go with it.
Okay.
Right? Right? So, and because when people read it, they read to the end, well, they're going to see the first comment.
Right.
Right? So it depends on if it's YouTube, where the thumbs up will push comments up, but it all depends on how the algorithm's done. But that's just one of those things or whatever. But going back to, do you create versus curate? I would say, again, remember we had that conversation about Woodrow Wilson, and when asked, because he writes his own speeches, and when asked, they go, well, how long does it take you to write a speech? And he goes, what, a 10-minute speech? Take me a month. Right? When he goes, a half-hour speech would take me a week. If you want to speak right now for an hour, 2 hours, I can do it right now. So the first couple blogs, and you would I think you would agree, if you've got to put a post up, and the first one takes the longest,
right?
Because of the value, they get a little bit easier and smoother sort of thing. But the first one took up probably 90% of my time compared to curating 10%.
Yeah.
And now I would probably say I'm more in the 20-80, 20% of my own content, 80% of me curating or sharing or commenting, or being involved in other conversations.
So I think what you have to do is create enough of your own content to be seen as credible. And then the rest of your curation, the stuff that you share or comment on or whatever, is going to be something that really enhances the value of the content that you do create. So I think, well, I would agree with you in terms of percentage-wise. When you're getting started with this, you need to establish yourself as someone who has their own thoughts and doesn't just say, yeah, good point. Great job, you. Yeah. Nice job writing that whole, that 1,500 words. That was really good. I'm glad I didn't have to do that, right?
Right.
Thumbs up. I think in order to establish yourself as someone who can do that, you don't need to be a serial sharer. You need to be someone who has their own thoughts and opinions and is seen as someone who's credible. And then your comments are more worthwhile. They're worth listening to because, oh yeah, this guy's actually got his own opinions and he thinks this is a good one too, even though it's just kind of shaded off of his own, or her own. And I think there's got to definitely be a balance of the two.
Well, with what you just sort of mentioned there, and I think you're actually totally onto that. if you become an authority or you become someone of value that can be trusted, then all of a sudden they can look at it, right? So that my first article I put on LinkedIn, for instance, I wrote it and I was waiting. Who's going to have, I was excited and stuff like that. So what happens is it took off. Lots of people were sharing it. People were commenting. Well, as people were commenting, the first couple, hey, great read. One comment, oh, it was too long, and gives me a, Lee Iacocca once said, if you can't do it in one page, then you should jump off a bridge or whatever. And I remember that one because negative is always the ones you look for, right? So what happens is, as I'm reading it, people were, because I sort of use myself in the first person, people were like, well, Neil alludes to this in his great story. And then it starts getting further and further down to, well, I've seen this before, or someone that I know you like this comment, right? Was oh, here we go with the sales prevention team, another sales prevention team in action, right?
Yeah.
And what happened was someone would sort of say, well, had Neil followed these steps, and starts to solution the whole thing out.
Yeah.
And what happened, and this is what I'm getting at, is this person started to solution the thing out. Well, somebody responded to his solutioning, and then that guy and further, went deeper with this. And of course, his byline is, well, with our training, well, we would, this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
Well, what happens is, he's just hijacked. And I don't think it's really hijacked, but you know what I mean? He's done exactly what we ought to be doing. That's a thing that we should be doing. When it comes down to curating, it's not the thumbs up. It's not just the sharing. It's getting involved in the conversation and adding value and seeing if you can strike up that conversation. In other words, get into the conversation.
I hope you enjoyed this part of my conversation with Neil O'Connor. I think we can all agree he's got some valuable insights that we can all put to some very good use. And we took our conversation and split it into a couple of different segments, so you'll be able to find the other parts on my channel. While you're surfing around looking for those, why don't you just subscribe? You can also subscribe to my weekly newsletter. It goes out every Sunday morning, and it's filled with more valuable pieces of information that you can use to be more successful. Until next time, go out and be great.